Welcome to the deep dive. You know, we often focus on our own path, right?
Yeah.
Our career, maybe our personal spiritual journey. It feels very individual.
It really does. That's sort of the modern default, thinking about the me.
But what if some ancient wisdom suggests it was never meant to be just about the individual? What if a spiritual journey, a really profound one, was always designed to include, well, your whole family?
That's exactly what's fascinating here. Our sources today point towards this consistent, broader, almost communal design for spiritual well-being that runs counter to how we often frame it now.
Absolutely. So today we're digging into this powerful concept, family salvation, and the idea of preserving godliness within a household.
And our main guide for this is a really rich sermon outline. It's titled God's Plan for the Salvation of Families, Acts 16.2943 by Pastor W.F. Kumuyi.
Yeah, it's quite something. It weaves together a lot of different biblical passages to make this central point about families and their collective spiritual health.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, what the source highlights is how consistently the family unit pops up across different eras, different covenants. These are like the solemn agreements God made. It suggests a really foundational principle.
One that maybe gets overlooked sometimes in more individual-focused views. So our mission today, to pull out the key nuggets from these sources about the provision, the promise, and the preservation of salvation and godliness within families.
And just to be clear, up front, when these texts talk about family salvation, they're not saying it's like automatic for everyone just because one person believes.
Right, that's a crucial distinction. It's more about God's intent, his plan, to consistently extend the offer and the means for spiritual well-being to whole families, making their collective journey a focus.
And godliness here means living life aligned with divine principles, things like peace, holiness, serving others not just on your own, but together as a family unit.
Exactly. So we're going to explore what these ancient texts suggest about this idea that goes way beyond just the individual. Okay, let's unpack this.
Let's start at the beginning, tracing back what the sources call the divine provision. This is about the historical roots, God's early actions showing this intent for family salvation.
The core idea being that, right from early biblical history, God made specific provisions, ways and means for protecting and saving entire families, not just scattered individuals. It's that shift from me to my house.
Precisely. And the starting point in Pastor Kumuyi's outline, which works well for us too, is Acts chapter 16. Verses 29 to 31.
Ah, yes, the Philippian jailer story. After the earthquake, he asked Paul and Silas, sirs, what must I do to be saved?
And their answer is just so significant. They say, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved, and thy house.
And thy house. The source really emphasizes that part, suggesting the apostles knew something broader was intended, extending that promise beyond just the jailer himself.
Right. And this idea that God's intervention wraps around the whole house, it shows up much earlier and really consistently in the older stories.
Yeah, like the Passover, Exodus 12. The source points out how the instruction was to take a lamb, well, for a house, for the whole household.
And the blood wasn't just for one person. It was put on the doorframe, the lintel, for the salvation of the dwellers there. It's a very clear picture of a provision for the entire family's deliverance.
Not an individual thing at all.
No. And you see it even earlier with Noah. Genesis 6 and 7, Hebrews 11 talks about it too. Amidst all the wickedness, Noah found grace.
Right, and God's promise wasn't just, I'll save you, Noah. It was, I'll save Noah and all his house from the flood.
And the insight the source draws out is how Noah's personal faith, his actions in building the ark, became the very means for his whole family's rescue. It shows this kind of ripple effect, this design for salvation right from the start.
The pattern just keeps appearing. Think about Joshua. Joshua 24.15, that really famous line.
As for me and my house.
Exactly. We will serve the Lord. The source highlights how his leadership, his decision, wasn't just personal. He was aiming for the salvation and commitment of every single person in his household.
It sets a precedent for spiritual leadership within the family structure.
Yeah, and it connects to Abraham too, doesn't it? In Genesis 18, God says he knows Abraham will command his children and his household after him to follow God's way.
Again, it points to God's plan for righteousness to be a household affair, something actively taught and passed down through generations within the family.
It's not just the big leaders either. The source brings up Rahab, Joshua chapter 2, Hebrews 11 again.
Rahab. She hears about God's power, and what does she do? She asks for her family to be saved.
Yeah, it's very specific. My father, my mother, my brethren, my sisters, and all they have. She makes this decisive petition, as the source puts it, for her whole extended family.
And her faith, her obedience in hiding the spies and hanging the scarlet cord, it leads directly to their collective survival when Jericho falls. It's quite a story.
It really is. It just powerfully shows how one person's belief can impact an entire lineage.
So looking at all these examples, it really drives home the point that, according to these sources, the idea of collective spiritual well-being for families wasn't an afterthought. It was embedded deep in the plan from early on.
Okay, so we've seen this historical foundation, this divine provision. Now, how does this evolve? The sources move into what they term the universal promise.
Right. This is where the focus shifts more to the New Testament, showing how that provision becomes a direct promise, actively preached and made available to whole families. And there's a real emphasis here on hope and inclusivity, no discrimination.
We start back with Acts 16, the jailer again. Believe, and thou shalt be saved, and thy house. The source points out how our own questions, like the jailer's, can be limited just focusing on me.
But the answer given, the promise itself, is presented as being available for all our loved ones. It broadens the horizon immediately.
And it gets even broader, doesn't it? Peter's sermon in Acts chapter 2.
Verses 38 and 39, yeah. He says the promise is for you and to your children and to all that are afar off.
That's huge. It suggests a generational reach, and even covers people geographically distant. It implies no one is really outside the potential scope of this hope.
Exactly. And this aligns with other passages the source brings in, like 1 Timothy 2. Verse 3 to 6 state, God will have all men to be saved and to come into the knowledge of the truth.
All men. And Christ gave himself a ransom for all.
Which the source applies to everyone in your family, your extended family, even your wider circle of influence. It's incredibly encompassing.
And then there's the patience aspect, 2 Peter 3.9.
Yes, that God is long-suffering, incredibly patient with us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. The source directly applies this divine patience to our family members. It offers, well, immense hope, even for those who seem far off.
So what does this all mean for us? It really sounds like these sources depict a God who is incredibly patient, incredibly inclusive about who can receive this promise.
It's not just a quiet offer to one person. It's presented as a loud declaration meant for entire households.
And how does this promise get delivered? The source points to preaching. Acts 16.32 says the apostles spake unto him the word of the Lord and to all that were in his house.
Right. The message wasn't just for the jailer. And that message, the gospel, is described elsewhere, like in Romans 1, as the power of God unto salvation to everyone that believeth. Crucially, it adds, no discrimination.
No discrimination. So it really raises a question for us, doesn't it? How does this big, inclusive promise challenge our often very individual ideas about faith?
Yeah, how does it encourage us to think about the spiritual journey of those around us? Even those afar off, it pushes beyond just personal belief towards sharing that message.
And the jailer's response in Acts 16 is shown as a kind of model, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Verses 33 and 34 say, he and all his were baptized straight away, immediately, and they rejoiced, believing in God with all his house.
The whole house. And the source notes his actions washing the apostles' wounds, feeding them as immediate evidence of his transformation. A complete turnaround.
It's a powerful picture. And it leads to this message of hope in the source material.
Yeah, that quote is really striking. Don't lose hope over any of your family members, no matter how far from God they have wandered. As long as they are alive, there is hope for them.
And the Lord who touched you and saved you will do the same for them. It's deeply encouraging, especially if you have loved ones who've, drifted away.
Definitely. Okay, so building on this salvation promise, the sources then get quite practical. They talk about the preservation of godliness.
This is about how that initial salvation experience is meant to be lived out day by day within the family context. How households that have received this message are meant to maintain godliness, peace, and active service.
Creating what the source seems to imply is a sort of divinely ordered home.
Exactly, and it points to examples, like Lydia's household, also in Acts 16. She and her household get baptized, and what's her first move? She invites the apostles to stay, showing hospitality. Faith lived out collectively.
Right, and then there's Stephanus' household in 1 Corinthians 16.
Yeah, the text says they addicted themselves to the ministry of the saints. That's strong language. It means they were wholeheartedly devoted as a family to serving others in the faith community.
These aren't just individual acts. They're presented as collective family commitments. It's about how faith functions within the family unit.
Which leads into cultivating peace and holiness right there at home. Hebrews 12.1 calls for pursuing peace with all men and holiness.
And the source applies this directly, forgiving other members of your household, actively working for peace inside the home.
And then there's Galatians 5, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. The source emphasizes consciously cultivating these within the family relationships.
That's quite a high bar for daily life, isn't it? Moving beyond just belief to actual practice and interactions.
It is, and it shows how these texts connect the big picture of salvation right down to the nitty-gritty of family dynamics, and this includes the very foundation, marriage.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this part carefully. This section in Pastor Kamuy's outline, drawing from Malachi 2 and Romans 7, makes some very specific and strong statements about marriage.
It does. The source states, based on Malachi, that God hateth putting away, referring to divorce, and warns against dealing treacherously against the wife of his youth.
And from Romans 7, it highlights the idea that marriage binds a person by the law to her husband so long as he liveth.
And then it draws a conclusion stating that, according to this interpretation, those who divorce and remarry while their first spouse is still alive are guilty of adultery.
It's important we're clear here. We're relaying what the source material, Pastor Kamuy's outline, states based on its interpretation of these passages.
Exactly. The source does add a clarification, though. Remarriage is permitted if one spouse is dead. So it presents a very specific viewpoint on the permanence and sanctity of marriage as being crucial for that divinely ordered home.
It certainly lays out a clear and quite strict expectation within this theological framework, viewing marriage stability as vital for the household's spiritual health.
Beyond these internal dynamics, the sources also touch on family and mission.
Right. Psalm 24 is mentioned, calling for families to have clean hands and pure hearts.
And the idea is that serving God shouldn't be separate from family life. It should involve the family, bringing joy and happiness within the home, while also reaching out to make others happy.
So it's about being a unit that isn't just internally focused, but has an outward impact too.
Precisely. Matthew 9 is cited, highlighting the need for harvesters, soul winners, pastors, and disciples. Pastor Kamuy's outline emphasizes praying for more laborers, strongly implying the family plays a collective role in this wider mission of sharing the faith.
It's a call for the family unit itself to be active in service and outreach.
Yes, demonstrating how a godly family, in this view, is meant to have both internal health and an external focus.
So, reflecting on our journey today, we started with God's historical actions, that divine provision for families in the Old Testament.
Then we moved to the universal promise in the New Testament, making salvation available to whole households.
And finally, we looked at the practical side, the preservation of godliness, covering daily life, those specific teachings on marriage, and the family's role in mission.
It really paints a picture drawn from these sources where salvation for your house is a consistent, recurring theme.
Yeah, it offers a different lens, maybe, for thinking about faith and family. Hopefully, it sparks some aha moments for you listening, seeing how these ideas connect across the texts.
It's a comprehensive perspective that emphasizes not just getting saved, but living saved together as a family unit with an outward purpose.
And it's interesting, the original sermon outline we've been drawing from, it actually concludes with a very direct call to a decision.
Oh, really? What does it say?
Well, it states its aim is to guide unbelievers to recognize Jesus Christ as the sole path to escape eternal judgment, and also to help believers find victory in life and ministry.
So, very action-oriented.
Very. It even includes a specific, simple prayer of faith for salvation and forgiveness, and provides a link for people who make that decision to connect further. It just highlights the practical goal behind the message in the source.
Makes sense.
So, maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering all these examples we've discussed, from Noah to the New Testament households, how might our own understanding of family as a unit of spiritual significance, well, how might it evolve?
And what does it really mean today, in your own life, in your context, to think about the spiritual well-being of your house, maybe in a broader sense than just your immediate relatives?
Yeah, something to mull over.
Yeah.
How does this collective idea resonate or challenge us now?
It certainly pushes us to look beyond just our individual journey and consider the wider impact and perhaps responsibility within our closest circles, and how that collective element might shape us and the world around us.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you feel well-informed, maybe challenged and inspired to look at these concepts in a fresh way.
Until next time.